The gazed gaze is what makes up the female gaze, and Ichiruki is saturated with countless moments where they return each other's gaze. Now, if Ichigo solely looked at Rukia with a longing gaze, and it was always one-sided in perspective, without Ichigo and Rukia's reliance on one another equally, then the gaze would be too one-sided, and thus would result in the male gaze. As Selloway argues in their talk, the male gaze, when it is just protagonist gazing at another protagonist with desire and it's only one-sided, then it has the risk of promoting the act of placing a woman upon a pedestal so that she becomes, as Selloway puts it, the Virgin Madonna archetype, or what I would call the pure and innocent ideal woman archetype. This also promotes, as Selloway describes, the other archetype that goes hand in hand with the innocent woman archetype, which is the promiscuous woman archetype. Female characters often fall into either of these two archetypes when a singular male gaze is concerned. But Ichiruki does not follow a singular one-sided gaze. The gaze is returned by Rukia. It's not solely Ichigo placing Rukia upon a pedestal as some idealistic dream girl. Rukia looks longingly at Ichigo just as much as he looks longingly at her. As I stated before, the two are on equal footing, which encourages the return of the gaze constantly throughout the show. Now, when we're talking about returning the gaze, or the gazed gaze, it is relevant to mention how Bleach exhibits the gazed gaze by incorporating shoujo manga imagery within the anime show itself, and to an extent the manga. So in shoujo manga and anime, which is the prime place to discover the female gaze, it often features sparkling eyes which dazzle in the light to express their own personal emotions, whether it be sadness, affection, attraction, and love for their crush or love interest. As Hemmen states, in shoujo manga, large eyes are connected to notions of innocence and vulnerability. So Rukia and also Ichigo both equally exhibit the stylistic choice of having the sparkling eyes that expresses their vulnerability.
Here's the issue I have with what this woman's talking about. First of all, she's using literature from a person who uses buzzwords like, you know, the male gaze and cis male, which was said earlier in the video. Here's the big problem I have with this, is that from what I'm listening, I might be misinterpreting this, but I don't think I am. From what I'm listening is that the male gaze, of course, once again, like it's done in much of feminist literature, and I use that word very loosely here, literature, when it relates to feminism, and that it is only the male gaze, it's primarily the male gaze that has all the negative, bad aspects, right? And so, like, from what I'm gathering here, the male gaze is like where a man stares or looks at a woman and is sexualizes her in a way, which, you know, means like he likes what he sees, essentially. And at no point does a female do that to a male, like in reverse, right? Here, the female gaze is painted as something much more abstract, much more ephemeral in nature, just like most feministic literature. It's got this iffy quality to it that you can't peg down anywhere. You can't pin it down anywhere. It doesn't want to, like, stay in a light. It doesn't want to be classified. It wants to just remain ephemeral and just forever just aflutter and just, like, without classification. It's like, it's the same thing with gender fluidity and all the other nonsense that feminism literature has spawned with the gender fluidity. It's like like this one famous YouTuber that I follow. His name's James Lindsay, very famous for these mock academic papers he made that just made a joke of all this whole feminism, gender theory nonsense, because he wrote something along the lines of like something to do with like bigotry in dog parks because dogs aren't willing to sniff each other's butts or something. It was something ridiculous, but like it just blew the lid off of all this and just showed just how absurd and nonsensical this whole area of sociology was, that claimed to be sociology, that it was just a bunch of nonsense. And so like for this particular this particular subject, it's the male gaze, of course, since it belongs to a man, is primarily bad. Okay. Even if that's not what they intend to say about it, that is how it's coming across. And so they should either learn how to use their words more efficiently and stop painting something in such a negative light by attributing all the negative aspects to it, or that's what they are actually intending to do, in which case, well, here we go. This is me interpreting this. The male is primarily bad. Okay, and then the female is like primarily good. And the reason why it's primarily good is because it's more ephemeral. It has much more to do with emotions and all the little subtleties and everything like that. So, from what I've gathered, is that the male gaze can't be performed by the female towards the male. And that's not because of the name, making that not possible, but because that's just something that happens. Because by default, I guess, the female always is doing the female gaze, and the male is always doing the male gaze. And then whenever the male returns the gaze and just doesn't do the male gaze to the female, then it's the gazed gaze, which is, just people looking at each other. And and then she talked about something else to do with equal footing. I can't remember where, but something about equal footing that came up. And of course that's an aspect of equality that that they are on equal footing. But like, here's the thing, is that Ichigo and Rukia are not on equal footing, like in any way. Rukia comes from a very noble family. That's her backstory. She comes from a noble family in the Soul Society, and like she's pressured into becoming a Shinigami, which is a death god, a soul reaper, a grim reaper essentially. Like that's what she's destined to do. Like she can't fight that destiny. And Ichigo is like from reality land, the real world as it's called. He's not from the Soul Society, which is like a spiritual realm. He's from a more crudely physical realm, which is reality, the real world. And he's just a normal everyday guy, a normal everyday kid who goes to high school in Japan. And is like, the anime outlines like his life, his everyday life, which is very boring and plain, but like it's entertaining enough. You know, he has some friends, but he's a very lax dude, and like so he's like I like that's the thing that I related to a lot with Ichigo, is that he and I kind of have that same aspect to us. Like we're just very laid back, and we're not very eventful in our everyday lives. It's very mundane life, and we both have a particular awareness of that fact of the modernity of our everyday life. And Ichigo also has, I think, the telltale signs for depression, and that should be obvious as to why he does, because his mother died. But like, he's very good at hiding it, his depression, which was, you know, something that I'm also pretty good at too. It's like I'm very good at hiding my depression and not burdening or bothering people with it. You know, for me, it's just experience, because whenever I bring it up, it makes people uncomfortable, or they don't know how to deal with it, or they're like ignorant of it, and they don't actually realize what depression actually is. They think it's just being sad, and I have to clarify. No, I don't do any of that anymore. I just hide it. That's one of the reasons why I do, but it's not just because it's inconvenient for me, but because I know it's also inconvenient for other people, because they just don't understand it. And also, like, sadness is a very burdensome thing, even if it's coming from another person. Even if you're just simply being in the vicinity of somebody who has depression, and knowing that they have depression, like, that puts a dampener on the mood. Like, that's unavoidable. And so, like, I try to not let people know about that, because I'm cognizant of that fact, and like I don't want to bother people with that. And also it has the added benefit that because I don't bring it up to other people, there's this weird psychosomatic effect on my brain that like I kind of forget about my depression. And so like all I have is like just the strictly chemical based effects of my depression, but like mentally, like consciously, I forget about it, right? And Ichigo, like, his character is a lot like something that I relate to, because he has that same type of temperament to him as I do. So like I relate deeply with Ichigo's character. Like he's very laid back, but he has a very good sense of humor, and he also like he reacts or like if somebody does something like weird or absurd to him, he likes to react and like kind of playfully, and like people like that about him, like that he reacts playfully. But he you know, whenever he reacts like he's upset about something, not really, but he's obvious like he's trying to be playful, but like being slightly dramatic about it, because you know he's trying to lift the mood somewhat. And the reason why he's trying to lift the mood is not just for himself, but for other people too, because like that's what he just likes to do. He's a very selfless guy. And like I related to that deeply. Very deeply. It's like, this is like me, essentially. It's like, this is like me. This is like a very tall, orange, blondish haired, I guess in the manga they called his hair color like auburn or something like that. Like this is a very tall, light haired anime version of me right here. Like this is like I relate to this character very deeply. And then on top of that, like there's that whole arc where like he goes to that inner city in his mind, you know, where he meets his hollow form, or he meets what is now known as Yuha, which is representation of Zangetsu, which is like his Quincy powers. And then like that's like a representation of like a spirit that was left there by his mom to like protect him. And so like this is like his inner being that he meets in this city that's like a perfect representation of Kakura Town, which is the city he lives in. And then like near the end of the arc with, you know, Aizen, he goes back to that city when he tries to get his final form for his Bankai, and like the whole city's flooded and just underwater, and then like the being he meets there is just like a fusion of his mother's Quincy's heritage and like his hollow form, and like it explains to him that the reason why the whole city is underwater is because like he gave up hope and stopped moving forward. And like that's like to a T perfectly describes, well, like how depression makes you feel. It feels like you just give up hope and you stop moving forward. And like that hit me like a truck. Like I related to that 100%. I was like, oh my god, that's so deep. Like because like basically he said the guy, the being that he met in that world was like, he's saying that it just one day it started raining, and it just kept raining and raining until like the whole city just got submerged and underwater. Because like that's like a key feature, like depression. It makes you feel like you're drowning. And like that was so deep, that imagery. And like I relate to Ichigo so much. Because that's like an anime version of me, essentially. And then like, to regress back to the original point of this video, it should be always, I don't really agree with what this girl is talking about here with the gendering of gazes. I mean, if they really wanted to be like fair about it, they should have just not gendered the terminology. Like that's where feminism constantly are stepping into large piles of shit. Like the underlying theorem and its terminology have potential for being something great and like legitimate, but then they consistently have this pattern where they continuously step into piles of shit by gendering their language. Like toxic masculinity, but there's no toxic femininity. The male gaze, which is primarily all bad, and then the female gaze, which is primarily all good and super deep and emotional based. They do that time after time, again and again and again, and it's so it's befuddling, and it's just so incomprehensibly aggravating that they keep doing that. They're so close to greatness, but they flub it. They fuck it up because they want to be hateful, all while coming across somehow as virtuous, when everyone knows what the fuck they're doing. It's quite clear. It's 15 years into this bullshit culture war that they've started, and they're still just as hateful as they were whenever it started. It's the bully. It's the cry bully, right? The cry bully. The bully who likes to play a victim, which is like the most disgusting thing you can be. And that's like most of feminist literature, right? Like, oh, look at me, how virtuous I'm being by advocating for oppressed minorities or some bullshit like that. But also let me fucking castigate and condemn this one demographic because there's something in particular I don't like about them. But I'm not going to say that part out loud. I'm instead going to use virtuous language to try and exile them, to cancel them, right? And they do that time after time again. And people deeply, intrinsically, they know what they're doing. We don't say it out loud because a lot of people don't have the ability to articulate it. They don't think about it too much, but they feel it. And that feeling tells them what's going on, even though they don't articulate it explicitly out loud. But they all know what's going on. They don't have the ability to articulate it, but they know. Without having articulated, they know what these social justice warriors are doing. These woke advocates. Even a terminology for that is like, it's clownified, or like woke, being woke. Like, that's not the way you use that word. Even that is like clownified. It's stupid, which is what this gendered, male versus male bullshit language is. It's stupidity, trying to dress itself up as academic and like complex and complicated, and just insightful. Like, it's none of that. It's just all garbage. It's not even junk food. It's just junk. This woman uses so many examples of like traditional romance novel bullshit, which we all know how the males are in romance novels and everything like that. I mean, she literally pulled Pride and Prejudice right here. He doesn't really clench his fist, he just flexes his hand. How old is this book, by the way? Pride and Prejudice? (1813). And it's about characters that exist even further in time than that. Right? Even further in the past than that. It's about like aristocracy of, like, you know, that whole French aristocrat period nonsense or whatever, I don't know. Yeah, it's this, you know, this shit, right? Same old tricks, you know? Same old nonsense. And I find it interesting because this girl, she's using like a fusion, right? And it's like a fusion of the old, and then like she comes over here and uses like something of the new with this female gaze rhetoric. The whole thing
essentially gravitated towards for such a long time. What made Ichiruki the ship I essentially gravitated towards?
The whole thing with Rukia and Ichigo is that they're more like siblings than they are in any way like lovers. Like, that's their whole thing. Like, this imagery is meant to impose a type of rivalry. And the fact that, like, this is like like she said, this is like the opportune relationship to her. And like, this is the apt relationship for most women, to be quite honest. Like, if I were to actually ask women and like get into it, they would probably say this is like their apt relationship, more or less, to them. But like, look at the screen right now. What do you see up on the screen? Ignore the text on the screen. Just look at these two right here. Look at my cursor, where it's going. See this? There's this repeating pattern with women where they see something physically, and then they see something physically that they like, and then they go after it with something that is not physical, right? women have this tendency to justify their behavior with aspects of the virtuoso. Like I said with the cry-bully phenomenon, right? Cry-bullies like to bully by playing the victim. Women have that much same tendency when it comes to relationships. They like a tall Chad. And then they throw aspects of virtuous and romance and love and all that onto this physical container, this vessel, that actually has nothing to do with the individual themselves. It's more ephemeral and collective in nature. And a woman, like I've seen in this video, she has this repeating pattern where it's all about like making her the focus, but then like making sure that the male is not the focus, but like the focus so that she can become the focus, if that makes any sense. It has this faux deepness to it. And the faux deepness, what is the faux deepness? The deepness is that this is like a complex structure of emotionality being exchanged back and forth between the male and the female. But that is not the case. All Rukia and Ichigo were meant to be is a rivalry, a clashing of worlds. Rukia is from the Soul Society. She is a Soul Reaper. She is of noble blood. She has a destiny that was set in stone the moment she was born. Ichigo is just a normal everyday guy that, by compared to Rukia, is literally just a nobody. He doesn't matter. And the fact that Rukia got entangled or like involved with Ichigo at all is born out of simple happenstance. He was just there. He was just there. And then like later on, a bunch of stuff ends up surfacing that, you know, he's like part Quincy and also part Soul Reaper, and that, you know, it wasn't really destiny, but like it was happenstance, and then like there's a complex structure of interlocking parts, which really is just Taita Kubo, you know, making it work because of course he's writing a story and that's what he's doing. But like just on the just like on the face of it, is just he was just there when something happened. What happened was that Rukia was fighting the same Hollow. Once again, this is Taita Kubo writing a story. The same Hollow that killed Ichigo's mom, which was the Grand Fisher Hollow, which was a pretty powerful Hollow at that point of the story. And Rukia wasn't able to finish the fight, and so she gave her Soul Reaper powers, which is the only time in the story that ever happens, to Ichigo. And the reason why he took all of her powers, is because she didn't realize that he had Soul Reaper blood in him. So like his soul was compatible with it fully. And like the way she phrases it is that, you know, his soul was being greedy and just decided to take all of her powers. And it's like, yes, but no. It's more. You obviously don't know the whole lore, chick, but that's fine. It's whatever. She's trying to paint this in a more kind of like romantic, this type of abstract art of romance that she's using to like justify her her liking of this relationship between Ichigo and Rukia that doesn't actually exist. It's a ship, which is short for relationship, that was pushed amongst the Bleach fandom. But like the relationship in the anime itself was never really there. Because that's not what Tadakubo's going for. Tadakubo here was trying to paint a dynamic of clashing worlds. Two people from entirely different worlds met by simple happenstance, and now this is set this complex domino effect of events in motion as a result, and which is the Bleach series. I think the relationship between Rukia and Ichigo, the forced relationship romance that's not really there, is not really a thing even at Tadakubo. Like, that's not what he was trying to go for at all. Spoiler alert if you don't already know this, but like, it's been out for a while, so whatever. Ichigo ends up with someone else named Orihime, which is a classmate from his high school. And Orihime is not too much taller. She's about right here. So like comes up to like about half of his head or something. I don't remember how tall he is, but he's pretty tall. But Orihime's a bit taller. Women have this insane thing for height. And they like to splash things on top of it. They like to misplace attributions to situations that actually have nothing to do with that. It does, but it doesn't. The situations itself, like in Pride and Prejudice, this whole dynamic, like, this is like the point in time where women were still being wedded off, you know? Like, women would be like 13 and they'd be wedded off to suitors that were like in their 30s. Like, that's what this period of time was all about. And like, that's what this woman is using as an example in this video. And it's interesting to me because she's using that, and then she goes to like using literature examples from like a literal feminist, using terms like cis male or male gaze and female gaze. And then of course the male gaze is all the bad and the female gaze is all the good. And it's like those are two things that shouldn't be compatible with one another because they're diametrically opposed. And so like, it's not a good thing to be diametrically opposed if you want things to work together with one another when you're trying to paint a picture like this. But that's what they do with a lot of things, women nowadays. And like, it's in their relationships now. And so like, in that sense, this makes sense, right? This makes sense that, you know, it would just be that she would try to be painting Ichigo and Rukia together when they're so at each other's necks in a rivalrous way. Because, like, that is like the ideal relationship for women nowadays. It's not one of compatibility, of one feeding back and forth to one another in a very healthy and optimal way that, facilitates deep connected passion, and that each person is sharing with one another a type of dichotomy that is actually equalizing in its nature. Instead, they are facilitating this dichotomy that facilitates an even further contrasting from one another. So like it divides. It has this thing where like it further divides, but like they try to like ignore that and like say that that's actually connection, but it's not. And so like there's this situation with Ichigo and Rukia that's being painted as a type of love, but it's actually a rivalry. It's an adversarial situation, and like that's what by and large a lot of women are facilitating nowadays, is an adversarial relationship that they try to paint as romantic, but it's not. Because guess what is synonymous for adversarial? Literally satanic. Satanic literally means adversarial, because Satan quite literally translates, or the meaning of the word means adversary. You can look that up. In fact, adversary. Can you fuck off, please? Whatever. Satan is a Hebrew word meaning adversary. Right there. One who resists. That's what most women are for. Satanic relationships that aren't actually relationships. They try to make what is a thing, what is not a thing, and they force it time after time after time again in every facet of life. Now there's this pandemic of really short girls wanting really tall guys. There's this pandemic of women facilitating adversarial adversarial attributes in their relationships, and then saying that that's like bonding or that's connection, but it's not. There's this pandemic, a woman confusing the anxiety based sensation of butterflies in the stomach and confusing that for love, but it's not. It's an anxiety, sympathetic nervous system triggered emotion, triggered feeling in the pit of the stomach that has to do with adversarialness, because you are facing a situation that has a sense of resistance to it. What is this resistance? Look at that height difference. The height difference she deserves, right? Woman, not all women, hashtag, but woman by and large. They even quantified it in a study about how 95% of women don't want to date a man shorter than them. Like, that's an outright deal breaker. Outright deal breaker. The male being shorter than them. 95% of women are that way. That's why I always say 95% of women, which is like indistinguishable from pretty much 100%, because that's how our brains work. Our brains don't really have a good time at distinguishing the bulk from the whole. We can't tell the difference between most of something and all of something. It's just like, if you try to make that distinction in your brain right now, your brain it can't do it. Not really. It can to a little bit degree, but when it comes to everyday life where it just pops up, it has trouble making that distinction. So that's just the way our brain works. But 95% of women follow satanic guidelines for how they go about, and possibly the most important aspect of their life, which is romance, romantic relations, mate selection, figuring out the aspects of the other, the significant other. 95% of women follow satanic guidelines for that. And that is what this female here, this girl, unwitting as she is doing in this video. She's laying out satanic guidelines. And the way that she did that without even realizing it is by following this male gaze versus female gaze, where the male gaze is primarily all bad, and it's just the male objectifying a woman because he feels like being an asshole, and not because like he actually like lusts after the woman, not in like a fucking weird, rabid, hateful way, but like that doesn't even make sense what I'm saying out loud. But he actually, men like women. Men like women. And you kind of have to like someone physically to like them like as a person. You have to. You can't like abstract qualities of them. There has to be something physical that anchors you to them. That anchors all the abstract qualities to the physical. That's how the fuck that works. And women, or men rather, by and large, from the get-go, they like to get that anchor into the physical aspects of a person before they go after and figure out their more abstract qualities. That's how men do it. But women, 95% of them, don't fucking do that. They have instead this weird system of adversarial tactics that they don't realize is not actually forming a connection with the person that is flesh and bone in front of you, but just making them an ephemeral quality that is like not anything in particular to them. And so like, how dehumanizing is that? Knowing that you are not in any way special for that woman, but she's making it seem like it is. Because you're all ephemeral qualities her, but you cannot be entirely abstract to a person. You need to have a physical anchor in reality, in the person you are looking at and attaching these qualities to. That's how the fuck that works. Men do not objectify women. Men are stupid and will confuse the extreme attraction that they have toward women on the physical barrier for love. Like, I've seen that happen multiple times. And yes, those men are idiots, and they should stop confusing that for love, because that's not what that is. But what men undoubtedly do better than women is that we like to fucking get our foot in the door first before we start rearranging and investigating the living room. Women don't even do that. Women will tell you over a walkie-talkie about what the fuck exactly your living room is about, except not even talk to you. Like, I don't even know what this is. Like, I can't put into words what exactly women do with men, because they don't know. Like, the best thing they can come up with is this, and this is just adversarial bullshit, trying to be dressed up as romance, but it's not. It's satanic. The only anchor women have for men is this height thing. But they are not actually this is the insane thing. They are not actually attracted to that facet. It's not really that. Like how when a man looks at a woman and lusts after her and her body, a woman doesn't do that with a tall male. What is she doing? She's looking at him and then holding herself up next to it, like as a contrast, and like she's getting a reaction out of the contrast, not from the male's body, which is like kind of like blowing my mind right now. I'm just blue because the whole nature of the female gaze is like some abstract, absurd, ephemeral event occurring on a psychological level that doesn't make any sense, and like that kind of like correlates to what I'm saying right now with this like this height thing. Is like women aren't actually lusting after the male body that is tall. They are lusting after the contrast and the interaction that arises from observing that contrast. That is it. That is what women are attracted to when they say they are attracted to tall men. They are not attracted to the male. They are attracted to the contrast, to being little, to feeling small and protected. That is it. They are not actually attracted to the male at all. The male is just a vessel for this interaction of observing the contrast. That is it. They don't have an equitable, they don't have like an equal thing to what the men do with women when they observe a woman's body and they lust after that woman. It doesn't matter if it's the body, the woman is still the body. That's not, you can't separate those two. But women separate the male entirely and just make it about the contrast, about feeling little, feeling smaller than the male. And it's not about the male at all. It's about feeling smaller and protected. And that feeling of smallness, they mistake for femininity. But it's not even that. Because that's not femininity. Smallness has nothing to do with femininity. It has absolutely zero to do with true femininity. Because guess what's this? True femininity is going the fuck up. It's growing the fuck up. That's what true femininity is. See this? Beautiful form. Woman could only dream of achieving this form. But she ain't small. No, 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 no. On the contrary, she's quite big. And by big, I mean tall. That is true femininity. The divine femininity. Divine feminine. The feminine of the mother. And a mother is not some squirrely little runt who gets off on being daddy's little girl. No, 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 no. Mother is mother. And mother is always in charge. She's physically present, and she doesn't give a fuck what her sacred holy betrothed is, which is the father. The father is not some gray old imbecile hiding in the clouds who looks like he could keel over at any moment, because that is just how freaking gray and old his ass is looking. He looks haggard. No, that is not father. Father is the Son. Just like it is outlined in the Bible, the Son and God are one and the same. And mother is not the Holy Ghost. Mother is the one true God who usurps the Father, because the Father has become the Son. And as the Son, then can the divine feminine and the divine masculine truly have a fruitful, brimming with all the radiance of holy light type of relationship, a marriage. This is the absolute opposite of satanic. This is divine. And women who fight this archetype of a dynamic for a relationship are satanic. And it's quite fucking clear. They come out and say it themselves unwittingly, because that is the way the programming is laid out. The snakes shall come out and expose themselves because they can't help it. It's their nature. It is written into every fiber of their being. It is programmed into their code to do that. This has already been set in motion from a long time ago. And now it's just playing itself out. This isn't a war or anything like that. It might take the form of that in the interim, but ultimately, in the bigger scheme of things, the bigger picture, it's just a program executing and fulfilling its function. It's a simulation arriving at its conclusion. What is that conclusion? Everlasting life. The opposite of that, death. Death itself dies.